Let's get right into it. Welcome back to the Explainer series, everyone. In part 16, we tackled the tricky world of CPT modifiers, figuring out exactly how to use those two-digit codes to tell the whole story of a surgery. But today we're jumping into something intense, highly visual, and honestly pretty sci-fi looking. We're diving deep into the 2000 series to decode external fixation devices. So think about this for a second. What looks like space-age hardware resembles a metal erector set, but is absolutely critical for saving limbs. Yep, external fixation. Now, I know these devices can look super intimidating. They look like this crazy puzzle of rods, clamps, and rings, but I promise you, mastering the CPT codes for these procedures is just about understanding the basic mechanics. So let's demystify this hardware. To understand why a surgeon even uses this stuff, we gotta look at the skeletal system itself. Doctors aren't pulling out this hardware for a simple, clean break. No way. This is for severe, high-trauma situations. We're talking about open fractures where the bone has literally broken through the skin, or massive crush injuries with tons of tissue damage and swelling. In these extreme cases, surgeons just can't safely open the patient up and put metal plates and screws inside the body yet. The tissue desperately needs time to heal. So their only option is to stabilize the skeleton from the outside. Right, so what exactly is it? Let's break it down super simply. External fixation is basically a procedure where the surgeon takes these long, sterile metal pins and drills them straight through the skin, through the muscle, and deep into the fractured bone. But here's the kicker. Those pins stick out of the skin. They're then clamped really tightly to a rigid stabilizing frame, like a thick metal rod or circular rings, and that whole frame sits completely on the outside of the patient's body, floating maybe an inch or two above the skin. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what we're talking about. You can see how the metal pins pierce the flesh and anchor securely right into those bone fragments. Meanwhile, the actual structural support, the metal rods and rings, just hangs out suspended in the air outside the limb. It's essentially external scaffolding. It holds the bone perfectly rigid so it can heal, but it leaves the skin and muscle exposed so doctors can easily treat the massive soft tissue damage underneath. Okay, so how does this translate to coding logic? In your CPT book, the primary application codes for this hardware are split into two distinct categories, based entirely on the geometry of the device. You've got uniplane fixation and multiplane fixation. We are going to clearly separate code 20690 from 20692 right now, so you never ever mix them up on an exam or a real-world claim. First up is code 20690, the uniplane external fixation. Uni means one. Think of this as the simpler setup. The CPT guidelines define this as placing all the pins in approximately the same plane. So, picture a patient's shin bone. The surgeon drills a couple of pins in a straight line right down the front of the leg. Those pins are clamped to one single solid metal bar running parallel to the leg. It operates in one dimension, one single plane. Contrast that with code 20692, the multi-plane fixation. The most famous example here is the Ilizarov frame. This thing is highly complex. Instead of a single straight line, the surgeon uses transosseous wires and threaded pins that pierce the bone from multiple different angles, front to back, side to side, diagonally. These multi-directional pins are then locked into a series of circular metal tensioning rings. So here is the punchy contrast you need to lock into your brain for reading operative reports. Code 20690, the uniplane, is generally going to be described as a straight line of pins connected to a rod on just one side of the leg. Code 20692, the multiplane, is described as a complex, three-dimensional circular cage or a halo that completely surrounds the limb. One plane versus many planes. Straight line versus circular cage. Now, once that complex multi-plane cage is on, the job isn't always done. That brings us to code 20693, which covers the adjustment or revision of a multi-plane device. Why adjust it? Well, often it's for this wild process called distraction osteogenesis, or bone lengthening. As the bone begins to heal, the surgeon literally takes a small wrench and turns the adjustment struts or dials on the metal frame every single day. This slowly and precisely stretches the healing bone apart, maybe just a millimeter at a time, forcing the body to regenerate new bone and actually lengthen the limb. It's incredible! But pay close attention to this next part. Code 2693 is not for the patient turning a tiny dial at home. Significant mechanical adjustments, or swapping out these struts and pins by the surgeon, are intense, painful procedures. Because they're heavily manipulating the bone and hardware, CPT guidelines strictly dictate that the specific adjustment code requires the patient to be under anesthesia. Fast forward a bit. The bones have finally healed. The scaffolding did its job, and now it's time to take the hardware off. This brings us to the absolute climax of today's explainer, and honestly, one of the most heavily tested concepts in musculoskeletal coding. What is the golden rule of removal? How exactly do we code taking this device off the patient? Burn this rule into your memory right now. This is the CPT guideline you absolutely must know. If the doctor unscrews the pins and takes the frame off in the clinic while the patient is awake, it is completely bundled into the original application code. You cannot bill for it, it's essentially free. You only code 20694 for removal if the device is so complex or the pins are so deeply embedded that the patient has to be wheeled into the operating room and placed under general anesthesia to get it off. Let me repeat that. No anesthesia, no OR, no removal code. Period. Ultimately, whether we're talking about the intricate bones of the lower leg or a crushed foot, everything we do in coding comes right back to the anatomy and the specific work performed. Whether the surgeon uses a simple uniplane bar down the tibia or builds an elaborate multiplane cage, your coding relies on precision. Read that op report, count the planes, check if anesthesia was used for adjustments, and always, always let that golden rule of removal be your guiding star. And that wraps up our intense look at external fixation. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out, because in part 18 of our explainer series, we are heading straight back to the spine. We're going to take a highly visual, deep dive into the incredibly complex world of spinal deformities, looking specifically at scoliosis and kyphosis surgeries. You've mastered modifiers, and today you proved you can navigate the sci-fi hardware of external fixation. So I'll leave you with this. If you can confidently decode the cage, are you ready to conquer the spine? Take a breather, review your notes on that golden rule of removal, and I'll see you in part 18. Keep studying, stay focused, and keep decoding.